as Nelson would say, the world is full of noise, and there's a lot of it out there, and the noise keeps us at bay from a lot of good things. And I believe that it's Romans 12:2 that says, "Be ye not conformed to the ways of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And Nelson was, as y'all know, he was big on thinking, and he was big on thinking differently, big on thinking long range and thinking different than everybody else, not thinking and doing like the masses.
Well, Scott, thanks for joining us. We want to start off by hearing your story of how you discovered the infinite banking concept.
Well, thank you, Lee. It's a privilege to be here with you guys today. And how I discovered the infinite banking concept. Well, they say, that you've heard necessity is the mother of all invention. Well, I say that because I was in the contracting business leading up to 2008, 2009 here in Georgia, was a licensed contractor, residential, light commercial. We did new construction and remodels in both of those spaces. And for where we are in very rural Georgia, Sandersville, Washington County, we were doing pretty well. So it seemed. We were in 2005, 6 at the peak of the market. I would say we were doing $5 or $6 million a year in construction revenue, and in that day's prices, that wasn't bad for a little small town building outfit that was my dad and myself on together. And so then we know that, as Nelson Nash was known for saying, reality always sets in. Well, reality set in 2008, and we, it caught us completely off guard. We thought we were living the American dream. And, we were doing it. We were borrowing money. We were in debt. We were developing property. We were building spec homes. We were building contract. And we were doing whatever. And we were building in about a 5 or 6 county area. And then, '08 happened. And that fall, when the housing bubble busted, then it hit us square between the eyes, caught us in a big, big way. And so I was perplexed. I was like, what in the world? I was 40 years old when that happened. Cause that's been, 16, 17 years ago, and I'll be 57 this year. So I was 40 years old. And, like I said, my plan was to build my business. And at 50 years old, I was going to sell it, and I was going to be living on the beach and in the mountains somewhere now, so that plan didn't work out too well. And, but when it happened, I just said, I sat back and I said, all right, God, I said, I'm not sure what just happened. But I want to know more, and I want to know why it happened. And at that point in time, I was not a reader. I had not really read a book since college. And I don't say that to brag, say it embarrassingly now, looking back. But I was just living my life, raising a family, married 2 sons, just doing life like everybody else, part of the herd, part of the problem, not part of the solution. And, so I said, God, why did this just happen to us? What did I miss? What am I not seeing here? What's going on? Like Nelson would talk about the iceberg. You see the 15% above the water. It's the 85% below the surface that sunk the Titanic. What am I not seeing? What am I missing? And at church one Sunday, a gentleman came up to me and he said, I'm coming to see you tomorrow, and I'm going to bring you a book, and I want you to read this book because I know you're searching for an answer. And I think this book is going to head you in the right direction. And so he walks in my office on Monday, and on my desk, he laid this book right here. Okay. Can you see that? The Creature from Jekyll Island. Okay. He laid that book down. This book is 600 pages thick. And I looked at it and I said, Bill, that's of a book, and you want me to read that book? I said, my gosh, man, I've not read 600 pages in the last 20 years. What are you doing here? What is this? And I said, The Creature from Jekyll Island. I said, man, as kids, we used to go to Jekyll Island. It's 3 hours down the road, literally 3 hours from my house. We used to go there to vacation all the time. I've never seen a creature at Jekyll Island. He said, read the book. And so I picked it up Yeah. And I started reading it and I couldn't put it down. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I fumbled my way through that book, 600 pages. And the only reason I was willing to read that was because I was hungry. I was at a point in my life where I was seeking and searching, and that was answering my questions. And so I made my way through that book, and it was eye opening. It was sickening. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. You know, whatever, you know, just, and the thing that got me was I never heard of it before. I lived 3 hours away. I'd never heard of that story in school, in college, in life at Jekyll Island. It was never a big deal when we went there on vacation. And I'm like, you know what? Why not? You know, why is this not mainstream information? Why doesn't everybody know this? Everybody needs to know this. And I said, okay, well, now I know that, but what do I do? You know, I know why. I know why '08 happened. I know that it was set up in 1910, 1913. You know, the plan was put in action to these 7 families to protect their money, or 7 guys to protect their money and power. And here it happens, played out perfectly in '08, you know, but what do I do now? And it wasn't long after that, another guy that was an acquaintance that not related to that gentleman presented me with another book that began to really open my eyes. And this is that book that he brought to me. And this is my autographed copy by Mr. Nelson Nash. And he laid this book in front of me one day, and he said, because we were talking about the creature from Jekyll Island, and he said, Scott, you need to read this book. And so I sat in my recliner one Sunday afternoon and read this book. And I was like, holy cow, I wish I'd have known this 20 years ago, you know. And as I got through reading it, he was dabbling in the infinite banking space with some outfit out of Arizona that I don't even think any longer exists. And I'd have to look back and see who it was. But what really spoke to me, Lee and David, was when I flipped to the back, and right there in the center, and I show people this all the time, in the center of page 91 on the left-hand side, one of Nelson's suggested readings is The Creature from Jekyll Island. And that connected the dots fully together for me. That brought a circle together for me, because now I had lived the problem. I was experiencing it full force. And this was all in 2008 into 2009. And I saw the details of the problem, the root of the problem, and now I had a solution to that problem. But there again, still didn't know what to do, you know. So I jumped on the phone and called the phone number in the book, and got Nelson on the phone at some point in time. And Dave, I don't know, were you back in '09? Were you on board at that time?
Yeah, I started with him in '04. Yeah, so I was fully invested by then. Yeah.
So I got Nelson on the phone, and we talked for a while, and I shared with him what I just shared with you guys. And he said, you need to get to one of my seminars. And I was like, when you coming to Georgia? You know, I'm in Georgia. He said, oh, we don't have anybody really in Georgia. We haven't done seminars in Georgia. We need somebody in Georgia, you know. And he said the closest one to you is coming up in a couple of months in Birmingham, Alabama. It's going to be hosted and sponsored by some guys here at Nowlin and Associates. And so anyway, fast forward a few months there, talking to Nelson, made my way to Birmingham to my first Nelson Nash live event. That was when he did like the Friday night and the all day Saturday deal. And that's how I met Nelson.
You know, The Creature from Jekyll Island is a mandatory read, but for people who don't really know what that's about, it's about the formation of the banking cartel, alias the Federal Reserve. And how the central bank kind of took us down the road of inflationary practices and whatnot. Yeah. So
that's right. I think I've always thought we need to do a think tank at Jekyll Island.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I toured that facility a year ago, November, and went in there, and you go into their boardroom. They got pictures in the boardroom of the Jekyll island in, I guess. And there's all the pictures of the JP Morgans and the rest of the crowd there.
Right.
And everybody's celebrating it, right?
Well, the interesting thing about that is they several years ago, they redid the History Museum that's across from the Jekyll Island Club Hotel where all this took place. Prior to what is there now, the old History Museum actually had the story on the wall of Aldrich and the Rockefellers and the secret train ride. All the secrecy was displayed in murals on the walls in there for everyone to come and see and read, but it's no more. They don't have it there now. And they don't even sell this book on site anymore. We were down there in May of this past year in the gift shop, and I was walking around looking at their books, and I didn't see the Creature from Jekyll Island any longer. And I went up to this young lady at the counter, probably 22, 23 years old, and I said, this is going to be an exercise in futility. She's not even going to know what I'm talking about. So I asked her, I said, I don't see the book in here, The Creature from Jekyll Island. And she turned around and she looked at me and she said, she said, they won't let us sell it anymore. And I said, what? She said, they won't let us sell it in here anymore. And I said, so I was shocked because she knew what it was. And I said, really, why not? She said, they say it's too controversial. And I was like, really? Wow. I said, that truth is a tough thing to handle, isn't it? She said, exactly. I think it should be sold in here. And I was shocked that there she was, a 22, 23-year-old, young lady. I'm sorry to stereotype there, but I mean, she was coming that way. But they don't even sell the book there anymore because of the truth that's in it. And they say it's too controversial to sell, in the bookstore.
After you attended that seminar with Nelson, and what was your next step? Did you buy a policy? How did you go from the contracting world to where you are now?
Well, obviously, I was still trying to find my way because I thought I had my life figured out. And I felt kind of, again, like the children of Israel wandering in the wilderness at that time, not knowing where I was going. But let me say this, and I'm going to come back to that question. One thing about Nelson Nash, the man, when I read Nelson's book, one of the things I noticed throughout it, and I'm a person of faith, of the Christian faith, and one of the things I noticed through here was all the biblical and scriptural references that Nelson has in this book. Well, people do that for one of two reasons. They either do it because they're genuine and real about it, or they do it to make people think there's something they're not and to manipulate people who might see that and subscribe to it where others will ignore it. So I didn't know why Nelson had done that. And when I got to that seminar in Birmingham, on Friday evening, Nelson got up and we got started, and I think it was around 6:00. He said, we're going to go for a little while, take a break, come back for a little while, and then we'll be done for the night, come back tomorrow. But when we got to break time, Nelson was standing there and he said, all right, we're going to take a 10, 15-minute break, do your normal stuff, fellowship and socialize a little bit, and come back and we'll finish up. He said, but before we do that, he said, I want to tell you something. And David, you might know where I'm going with this. He said, we're going to talk about a lot of really good life-changing stuff financially over the next 10 hours together. He said, but there's one thing that if you don't have right and you don't know for sure, none of this is going to matter. He said, and that's whether or not you know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And if you don't have that right in your life at this moment, come up here and see me during this break and let's get it right so everything else will be right. And that's not a verbatim, obviously, because that's been years ago, but that was the point he made. And I sat there in my chair and I was like, okay, the man's real, because he just stood in front of a room of 70 people. He probably knew some of them, but probably didn't know most of them. And many of them had paid to be there. And he just stood there and he did that. And that could have turned a lot of people off. Okay, especially in today's world. Could have made a lot of people mad. Could have made a lot of people not want to come back for the rest of the show, the rest of the seminar. And he didn't care. Nelson didn't care. He stood on what he believed in, and it showed me his genuineness. And I never doubted from that point forward. I never doubted anything about the man, Nelson Nash.
You're exactly right. That's where he was coming from. That was his foundation. And it did turn a lot of people off and still does, but oh well.
But Lee, to your question about what happened next. So that Friday evening, a guy named Justin Kraft with Allen and Associates there in Birmingham, they had sponsored that seminar. I had met him that evening, and like I said, I had read and studied the infinite banking concept, and I had actually gotten my Georgia State insurance license. I didn't have much going on, and I went ahead and got my license, but I was not affiliated with anybody. I just did it because I had time to do it. Didn't mean a thing. I spent money and wasn't doing anything with it. And so when I got ready to leave there on that Friday evening to go to the hotel, my wife and my youngest son, Zeb, who now is a blessing and in the business with me, and I love it, but he was about 6 years old at that time. He was with us, and I was going to the hotel where they were. And remember, I had just closed my building business. We were on a budget. I really couldn't afford to be at this seminar in Birmingham, Alabama. Honestly, things were that tight financially, but we made a way to make it work. And, it was the right thing to do. But Justin came up to me at the end of the night. He said, "Hey, Scott," he said, "I know you're here from Georgia." He said, "Nelson's told me a little bit about y'all's conversation." He said, "What are you doing tomorrow morning?" And I said, "Coming back here." He said, "No, I mean, before." He said, "Do you want to meet at Cracker Barrel right here?" Because we were right there at the Colonnade. There was a hotel there, David, where this seminar was at, right there at the Colonnade. I think it was a Hilton right there. And anyway, he said, "Let's meet at Cracker Barrel, do breakfast, get to know one another a little bit." So we did, and got to know each other, and left and went to the seminar. And the seminar went on till, I don't know, 3 or 4 o'clock that afternoon. And I talked to Nelson and other people there while we were doing, at breaks. But at the end of the day, when it was over with and we were not staying that night, we had to, like I said, we could only afford one night in a hotel. And we were getting ready to leave, make our way back to Georgia. Justin came up to me at the end of the seminar, and he said, "Hey, I don't know what your plans are and what you're thinking you're going to do with this and all that." He said, "I know you got a lot on your mind, a lot to kind of figure out here and search through." He said, "But just know that if you decide to move forward in any way, whether it's personal policies for you and your family implement, or whether you want to get into this business," because he knew I had gotten my state of Georgia insurance license. He said, there's a conversation I'd like to have with you. He said, "There's an open door here at Allen and Associates for whatever you decide." I shook his hand, said, "Thank you. That means a lot. I have no idea." So we left, and on the way back home, it's a 4.5-hour ride back home. My wife and I were just talking, and I was like, "Honey, I don't know what to do. It's like God's opened the door here, and I can't do anything to shut it. I didn't have to force it open. I'm not having to put my foot in it to keep it from closing. But I don't know what to do." Things were just kind of moving, and we're creatures of habit. And I was still thinking the contracting business was going to come back and, all that kind of stuff. So, I would say over the next 30 days, I had numerous conversations with Nelson, email, phone, we talked. And finally, at about the end of 30 days, Nelson told me that day, he said, "Scott, you are ready. You need to be doing this. You are living the story. You understand the creature from Jekyll Island. You understand the whole reason. You understand the problem. Now you understand the solution, and you're doing nothing with it. You're not helping yourself, your family, and you're not helping anybody else. You're just part of the problem." You can hear Nelson. I mean, it's time. Enough's enough. He said, "If you don't call Justin Kraft and tell him you're ready to do something, I'm going to call him for you." And I was like, "Okay, Nelson, I'll call him." So hung over Nelson, and the next day I called Allen and Associates and leave a message for Justin. And Justin calls me back, and he said, "Yeah, Nelson Nash called me yesterday and told me to be expecting your phone call." And so from there, that was probably May of 2010. From there, I decided to get on board with Justin and the guys at Allen and Associates, Charlie and Allen, became an agent with them. And because I still had all of my warm market connections with everybody I had done business with over the, 16 years prior to that, I just went to people and started talking to them about what was going on in our country and in our economy and in our monetary and banking system, and, the foundational structural problems we had, and how there was really a way that they could begin to take control of it in their life. And I just had a bunch of books, and I was telling, "Look, I don't know everything about this, and I'm not going to pretend to know, but I know people that do. And if you'll read this book, there's a conversation I'd like to have with you. And I'll have somebody with me that can answer your questions." So people started doing that, and Justin Kraft made that first year, 2010. There's no telling how many trips that man made to Georgia to come over here after I'd get 3 or 4 people ready for a meeting. And we were bringing on clients. People wanted it, they understood it, they'd never seen it before, and we were bringing people on. Really, I mean, at a pretty rapid pace. By probably August, I did my first policy. I wanted to do one quicker, but I just didn't have the money to do it with. I mean, we were bootstrapping it as a family. I mean, we really, really were bootstrapping it. And so by August, I had the money to put a policy in place on myself, and I did it. And, I've got multiple policies now in our family, myself, both of my sons. We've got, a system built and still continuing to build more. But that first policy was in August of 2010, just a few months after I started in the business at Nelson's urging to get it done,
But it was obvious that he believed in you. He saw something in you and, your experience. And he just really believed that you could go out and help others who had gone through or are going through similar circumstances. And so, I think that's what he really, what he saw in you. And so now you said, I wish I would have known about this back when I started my contracting business. If you could go back and give yourself some advice, what would you say to yourself?
Well, I would say, as Nelson would say, the world is full of noise, and there's a lot of it out there. And, the noise keeps us at bay from a lot of good things. And I believe that it's Romans 12:2 that says, "Be ye not conformed to the ways of this world, be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And Nelson was, as y'all know, he was big on thinking, and he was big on thinking differently, big on thinking long range and thinking, different than everybody else, not thinking and doing like the masses. And I would say to someone who's really seeking and searching, to realize that, there's that noise out there that wants us to be held at bay, that wants to keep us captive to the way things are done. Money is a very powerful thing, and it's powerful when it's used correctly, and it's powerful when it's used, for bad things. And so, we have to realize that there's a system out there, and it really does go back to this, right here. There's a system that's 100+ years old now that wants control of everything in our life: education, healthcare, food, and money. It wants control of all those things. And there's a book called Outwitting the Devil, written by Napoleon Hill. And if you've never read it, I highly recommend it, because he talks about it. And he wrote that book in the 1930s. It'll blow your mind what he wrote at that time about what was going to happen because of that control. And it's a profound writing, like Nelson's are. But I would say you got to filter out that noise. Nelson was talking about using noise canceling headphones on flights. You got to cancel out that noise. Cancel it out, and you got to get past it and get through it and realize that the masses are herd mentality. The masses, if you want the same outcomes as everyone else, just keep doing the same thing everybody else is doing. If you want your life to be different, you got to think differently. You got to develop different habits. You got to behave and do differently. And if you do that, you'll have different outcomes and results. And so I would say, filter out the noise, dig in, give yourself the opportunity to learn something you don't know now, and to possibly better yourself through it. And the infinite banking concept is not an end all be all. It's not a magic bullet. It's not some flashy thing. It's so simple. That's often the problem, I think, is that it's not sexy, it's not sizzling, it's very basic and fundamental and foundational. And most people are looking for something sexy and sizzling. And here we're talking about basic money management and financial behavior and creating stewardship, taking control of the banking function, and figuring out again who the characters in the play are, and we've forgotten all that. So that, taking a few hours to sit down and read that 90-page book, and maybe watch a few real videos about it, the value of that to yourself, your family, and the future generations, there's no way to put a price tag on that.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked about the problem and you talked about the solution. You know, when I think about who's watching this video or listening to this podcast, it's like, well, what's the problem and what's the solution? I mean, I guess we're assuming too much, and so to get the answer, the chapter in BYOB, Become Your Own Maker, there's actually a chapter titled The Problem. Okay. So that's where you start, right? And if somebody doesn't understand the problem, then the solution doesn't mean anything. But, so that's a key thing. And throwing numbers at somebody does nothing but cause confusion and cause, debates and stuff. So you got to take ownership of this thing. And you took ownership of it because you fully understood the problem. And you acknowledge you understand the problem, but you painfully experienced it in the housing bubble that burst in 2008, 2009. So that's probably why Nelson saw the potential in you, because you had that scar from the personal exposure to that. So you also mentioned that you were not a reader, and you worked through a 600-page book. Are you a reader now?
Yes, yeah. I try to keep something going. Not all the time, but try to keep something going. Reading, and a lot of times it's something biblical. Or a lot of times I'll reread Nelson's book. I'll reread, I mentioned, Outwitting the Devil. I mean, there are certain books that I'll go back and I'll read multiple times. I read a lot of John Maxwell leadership books and we'll reread those, so I try, or listening to something, at least feeding my mind with something. It's like right now, I just started reading and studying the book of Revelation, and that's that's one to dig into, right? So, I want to read something to y'all. And I'm not doing this in any way, shape, form, or fashion to sound braggadocious or to toot my own horn, but back in 2017, Nelson and I were talking one day, and Lee, this is kind of to your point where you said Nelson saw something in me, and I humbly take that as the highest level compliment. But Nelson said, I'm going to send you an email and use it any way you want to, for your benefit. And he sent this to me in 2017. So I had known Nelson at that time for about 7 years, I guess. And it says, it has been my privilege to have known Scott Chapman and his exceptional family for 7 years or more. It has been a blessing in my life to know that there are people who can think and conduct their lives according to these superior thoughts that are his. Scott has insight into things that are worthwhile pursuits and the ability to attract others who can benefit from them. Scott's enthusiasm for the infinite banking concept and the enthusiasm with which he is able to transmit its message gives me hope for the future. Everyone can benefit from spending time with this good man. I recommend him to you. And he sent that to me, and I've kept it, obviously, because it means a lot to me, to know that was the relationship that we had, and all. And I do. I mean, I show that to people. We're finishing up our new website, and that is going to be on our website. So I put a lot of value in the way Nelson Nash, and our relationship was, and the way he felt about, that. So
how have you grown in your practice since you started implementing the infinite banking concept?
There are many different areas of growth in our life. Obviously, I think that I've grown in so many ways in so many different areas outside of my daily business. I've grown spiritually. And I think '08 had a lot to do with that. Really bringing me back to my relationship with Jesus Christ and really, getting that like it needed to be. and hearing Nelson talk about that in that seminar that I mentioned. But I've grown in leadership. I've grown, I feel like, as a husband, as a father, just as a human being in all those areas. And I think it all relates back to my relationship with Nelson and discovering infinite banking and realizing that there are people out there that are hungry, they're searching, they're seeking for answers in life. And we don't know what we don't know until we know it. And you know, we consider ourselves, and I say we, me and Zeb, my son, to be Nelson Nash purists. I tell people that all the time. We're Nelson Nash purists. We do it the way that Nelson did it. We don't pollute it, dilute it, or convolute it, try to sensationalize it, make it something it's not. But we do it the way he did it and the way he taught us to do it. And that's the way we're going to do it. And if you want something different, if you want some of these newfangled twists and different things going on out there in the world with it, we're not your guy. You know, thank you for considering us, but we're not your guy. And I think that comes in growing our business. You know, we've helped a lot of people, and I've never been, I mentioned to you, we're building a new website. I've been in this business since 2010 and have never had a personal website for our business. Okay. So I'm just, you know, I'm 57 years old. I'm kind of in that rut. I'm too old not to know about technology. But then again, I don't care, you know, about it on some, you know, it's great. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that's what's enabling us to do and allowing us to do this, but I learned it because I had to. And so it's been a blessing to me. Like I said, the NNI website has been good to us for referrals. We get referrals every year and off of that website, and we get multiple referrals from that, multiple clients. And we get a lot of referrals from our clients, you know, and then we do seminars and we do live events and Zooms and that kind of stuff. You know, so, I mean, we stay busy, you know, with it. I mean, and our business is growing. We're reaching out further and doing more now and building this website that should launch next week. I think it's going to be beneficial and helpful. So, you know, I mean, we're just with Zeb in here. Zeb's 23. He'll be 23 in March. So he's the young mind, the young breed. He's brought us out of the Stone Age, he says, and, you know, and helping us get out there with a little bit of technology and grow even more from a business perspective. But I look at growth not only from a business perspective, but just from a personal perspective as well, and growing in all different areas of life. I think it's important because you get out of balance if you don't grow in all areas.
So you talked about some of these, you know, there's a lot of noise out there, especially on social media. How do you debunk some of those misconceptions about it? And, you know, do you have clients that bring things to you and say, hey, I just heard this, you know, tell us about that. How do you help educate your clients and keep them on the right path?
Well, I would say I'm thankful to those people that are out there on, you know, YouTube and Instagram, whatever, all that are putting information out there about it, because they are bringing it to the forefront. They are helping more people hear about infinite banking. So, you know, I'm thankful for that. And I think that when they do that and people do their due diligence and they wind up on the NNI website, where they begin to see, and then they discover, who do I want to contact? You know, who do I want to reach out to talk to about this, and how it works and how it can benefit me and, you know, my family, my business, or whatever. You know, that once they contact us, and, you know, I just let them talk, you know, tell me why you called. What do you know? What have you heard? What have you done personally to learn, to study, to educate yourself on IBC? And I let them tell me all that and what they think they might know and everything. And then we just go into it. And one of the first things I tell them is exactly what I said a while ago, that we are Nelson Nash purists, and that there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there today about IBC that's going to lead them down the wrong path, and it's going to cause them issues down the road when it's too late for them to recognize. And that we are never going to have that conversation with them, because we're not going to do that to them. Okay. And I say, we are going to do it the right way, the way it was designed from the beginning. We're not going to try to twist it and churn it and turn it and make it something it's not. We're not going to come up with some of these new ways to fund policies and, you know, all that kind of stuff that's out there now. We're going to do it the way Nelson did it. You know, my promise to Nelson was that I would carry on his method, his message, and his mission, and I'm going to do that. And if that's not okay, if that's not what you're looking for, thank you for reaching out to us, but we're not your guy. You know, now, if you're open to understanding why we would allow you to walk away from us when you're wanting to do business with us, if you're open to let's talk through this and let's show you why this and why not this and how this works. Remember, IBC is not about thinking short term. It's not about trading future benefits for something today. It's long range. It's long range. And so many people are trying to make it a short range thing rather than a long range thing. And that goes against all the tenets of infinite banking and Nelson's, the reason he did it. So if they're willing to sit down and you know what, I'd say, Lee and David, I'd say that out of those that have come to us in that form, in that, you know, with that idea and mindset, 90% of them have become clients of ours, but doing it the right way. We've lost a few, and that's okay, you know, because I'd rather have, you know, no business is better than bad business. And I'm okay. But the 90% that sat down, talked with us, understood it, they're better for it today.
But thinking long range is critically important. And that, you know, like you mentioned, and, you know, he doesn't talk about those 5 tenets of becoming your own banker. Nelson doesn't. But he does talk about them in the case for IBC. So, plus they're all over our website.
Let me share something with y'all that this was Nelson in his purest fashion. So one Christmas, one December, as y'all know, you know, with Allen and Associates, we have a Christmas dinner every mid-December there in Birmingham, and we usually venture over for that. And so probably about I don't know, maybe my 3rd year in the business, I said, you know what, this was November, and I said, I'm going to call Nelson, and I'm going to see if Nelson would let me come over a day early and just spend a day with him and just pick his brain. Just me and him, nobody else, you know, 5 or 6 hours, just pick his brain, ask him questions, you know, whatever. And I think this was when he was writing Building Your Warehouse of Wealth. That book was still, a lot of it was up here, and he had the computer document on it, you know, his that he was writing. And I'm pretty sure that's what he shared a little bit with me, you know, when we were there in his office. And so anyway, but let me go back to my story. So I called him up and I said, Nelson, I got a request. And I said, I want to preface this by saying, I will pay you whatever you want to charge me for this. I said, this is how important this is to me. So you just tell me what it will cost me and I will gladly pay it. And he said, well, what are you wanting, Scott? And I told him, I said, I want to come over December so-and-so and have a day with you and just pick your brain and ask you questions. And if I can get 5 or 6 hours of your time, whatever you want to charge me, I'm willing to pay. Phone got real quiet. And I was like, uh-oh. And Nelson said, absolutely not. And didn't say anything else. And I was like, okay, that didn't go over so well. And I said, okay, well, you know, I didn't think it would hurt to ask. I'm sorry if, you know, that. He said, Scott Chapman. I said, what? He said, there's absolutely no way I will let you pay me one dime to spend the day with me. So what he was saying no to was me paying him for his time. He was not saying no to me spending the time with him. And he said, you can come over here. We'll make a date. He said, but only if you'll bring your lovely bride with you. And she's going to sit with Miss Mary. And they're going to do lady and girl things while you and I talk infinite banking. And we're going to go to lunch together and this, that, and the other. But you're not going to pay me a dime. And we did just that.
Well, you paid for lunch though, didn't you?
Yeah, I paid for lunch. Yeah, I did.
Well,
I did.
Yeah. Two things that are Nelson Nashisms. The first one is closing the deal. The second one is lunch is critically important. And almost every one of these podcasts we've done, lunch comes up also. So that's a recurring thing. I'm glad you came up with that. But you know, you called the wrong person about that. You should have called me. No. Yeah. So
You would have charged me.
You
He
spent a
did.
day with Nelson. Yeah, there you go. You should have recorded it.
Oh, I know. Yeah, hindsight's 2020, right? I wish I had. But it just meant a lot to me to be able to do that. And I don't remember what all we talked about. I was learning, I was absorbing, I was being a sponge, but Nelson came over to Georgia several times and did seminars with us here in Georgia. And so of course he was a Georgia boy at heart. Literally, I mean, born in Greensboro, Georgia, right? That is literally an hour north of me on Highway 15.
Greene County. Yeah.
Yep. Greene County, Georgia. It's where my family roots are from as well. But, he lived right there, born there, lived in Athens. So all that happened literally within 90 miles north of me, from where I'm sitting now. So he was, as you know, a Georgia Bulldog at heart. And, so we had a good time talking that as well.
Well, is there anything else that you wanted to share with us, Scott? I love that story about, spending the day with Nelson. Is there anything else? You've spent a lot of time with him over the years, and, people would love to hear just stories from people who had a personal relationship with him. Is there anything else?
I just remember like when Nelson would be over here with us doing some seminars and stuff, and just how he met and related to people, just in those seminars and, of course he was the star of the show, but just, his mannerisms and his Southern gentleman, character and just the stuff like that. And just people always, I never heard anybody say anything negative or bad about Nelson Nash, when he was over here with us. And it was always cool to have him come over and do that. And, let some of the people who were our clients actually meet him and, be able to spend some time in conversation with him. So I was always appreciative of that with him and the fact that he was willing to do that. So.
Well, as we wrap up, what does the infinite banking concept mean to you?
It means freedom. It means being in control. It means a difference for my family for generations to come. I in a seminar one time I asked that question. I said, well, not that exact question. I asked people, what does freedom mean to them? And these 4 answers, if I can remember them all, came back: comfort, choices, control. There was one more, and I cannot. Certainty. It's 4 C's: comfort, choices, control, and certainty. And that really sums it up right there, And so when you think about the things that infinite banking brings to you, as Nelson would say, it makes for a peaceful, easy way of life, a peaceful way of living. And that's freedom. That's comfort, certainty, choices, and control. And one time I think we were at a think tank, and Nelson was up speaking, and it was kind of a casual conversation. People in the audience were saying things, and he was calling on people and Nelson was talking about how important control is when it comes to our money and our finance, controlling the banking function so that money that was flowing away from us now flows back to us, and we turn those liabilities into assets, and we get all the present and future benefits of doing that. And I raised my hand and I said, Nelson, I've heard you say control a lot. And I said, so here's kind of the way I'm looking at it. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I said, in real estate, they say the 3 most important things in real estate are location, location, location. And I said, if I'm understanding you right, the 3 most important things when it comes to our money are control, control, control. And he said, bingo, you got it. And so I just think that freedom, really, if people really thought about what financial freedom means, that's what the infinite banking concept is all about.